10 Irish Banshee legends. Just when you think the cries have faded, they rise again. Eerie, mournful, unmistakable. In Ireland, the legend of the Banshee is more than folklore. It's a living, whispered fear. Across this haunted land, from riverbanks and forests to wind-beaten islands, new tales continue to surface. Tales of ghostly women who scream into the darkness, washing the clothes of the soon-to-be dead, or sobbing silently just beyond sight. We thought we had heard all her stories. We were wrong. These are 10 more of Ireland's most chilling Banshee legends, lesser known but no less terrifying, each echoing the ancient cry that signals death is near. Legend number 1, the Washerwoman of the Boine. The River Boine is woven into Ireland's ancient identity. It cuts through the land like a winding scar. Beneath its calm waters lie memories of kings, saints, and battles long forgotten. But the Boine carries more than history. According to locals near Slane and Trim, it carries a curse in the form of a ghostly woman who washes the clothes of the doomed. They call her the Washerwoman of the Boine. She is always seen alone, just before sunrise or in the fading blue hour before nightfall. Bent low over the rocks at the water's edge, she scrubs fabric with long, thin fingers, rubbing and rinsing until blood leaches into the water. Her garments are ragged and her movements deliberate. Witnesses rarely see her face, but those who do say her eyes are hollow, her mouth frozen in an eternal gasp of grief. The first known record of her appearance came in 1781. A miller named Eerie Brennan, heading home at dusk, heard the unmistakable sound of fabric being beaten against stone. Curious, he followed the sound to the riverbank and found her there, scrubbing what looked like a red-stained white shirt. She never turned to acknowledge him, but the air around her felt colder than frost. Eerie fled, and the next morning his eldest brother collapsed and died of an undiagnosed illness. Similar stories surfaced through the 19th and early 20th centuries. In 1863, a young couple walking near the river after Mass reported hearing soft sobbing and the wet slap of fabric. When they looked down from a nearby ridge, they saw her, hunched, alone, weeping. That same week, 2 villagers drowned in a sudden river swell. Folklorists believe she may be a remnant of a much older spirit known as the Bean Naig, a supernatural washerwoman from pre-Christian Irish mythology. These spirits were said to launder the blood-stained clothes of those fated to die, sometimes giving warnings to those who saw them. Modern sightings are rare, but not unheard of. In 2004, a tourist camping near Oldbridge claimed he heard crying and water slapping against stone in the middle of the night. When he investigated, he found only a smooth rock with a red-stained cloth lying on top of it. Days later, he learned a farmer just upriver had died in a tractor accident. Some locals still refuse to walk near the Boine after dark. Those who do carry rosary beads or mutter quiet prayers. It's said that if you interrupt her work, she will drop the clothes and vanish, only for your name to be the next spoken by her ghostly lips. Is she a spirit of mourning? A fairy creature bound to ancient ritual, or simply a figment of the imagination? For those who've seen her, it doesn't matter. What matters is the sound of water, the smell of blood in the air, the cry that seems to rise from the very stones of the riverbank, and the knowing when the Washerwoman of the Boine appears, someone is about to die. Legend number 2, the red-haired Banshee of Rathlin Island. Off the northern coast of County Antrim lies Rathlin Island, a rugged sliver of land where cliffs tower above crashing waves, and the wind seems to carry ancient secrets. It's a place of seabirds, shipwrecks, and silence. But when the storm clouds gather and the sea grows dark, islanders still speak of her. A figure with wild red hair, seen wandering the cliffs at dusk, the Banshee of Rathlin. Unlike other Banshee legends tied to noble bloodlines or family names, This spirit is different. She belongs to the island itself. Locals believe she is the ghost of a woman named Myrene, a healer and midwife who lived on Rathlin over 300 years ago. Known for her red hair and fierce spirit, Myrene was loved by many and feared by some. When a smallpox outbreak struck the island, Myrene cared for the sick without rest. Though she saved many, she fell ill herself and died alone in her stone cottage overlooking the cliffs. The story goes that on the night she died, a terrible storm lashed Rathlin's coast. A fishing boat returning to the harbour was dashed against the rocks, and the entire crew was lost. As the bodies washed ashore the next morning, villagers claimed to have heard a woman's screams carried on the wind throughout the night. Since then, her wailing cry has been heard before every major death on the island, especially those tied to the sea. Her apparition appears during storms, her flame-red hair streaming behind her like fire in the wind. Witnesses say she wears a long, salt-stained cloak, and her feet never touch the ground. One of the most famous encounters happened in 1912. A lighthouse keeper reported seeing a woman standing on the edge of the cliffs during a squall. He shouted a warning, thinking she might jump, but the figure simply turned and let out a piercing cry. The next morning, news arrived that the Titanic had sunk, and several Rathlin natives were among the dead. Another tale comes from 1986, when a local teenager hiking the coastal path heard what he thought was a woman crying in distress. As he approached the cliff edge, he saw a red-haired figure staring out to sea. When he called out, she turned, and her face was said to be streaked with tears and seaweed. He ran, and later that week, an island fisherman was lost to the waves during a routine outing. Despite her terrifying appearance, many islanders believe the red-haired Banshee isn't evil. She's a mourner, a sorrowful spirit still grieving those who died without cause. Some even say she's trying to warn people, her cries a plea to stay away from the sea when danger is near. Even now, during long winter nights, some claim to hear her on the wind. Not a scream, but a low, sorrowful howl echoing off the cliffs and into the foam below. On Rathlin Island, they don't ask whether the Banshee exists. They ask only who her next cry is for. Legend number 3, the Mourning Widow of Roscommen Abbey. Deep in the heart of County Roscommen, half hidden by trees and time, lie the ruins of Roscommen Abbey. Built in the 13th century and ravaged by centuries of fire, war and decay, the abbey is now little more than broken walls and empty graves. Yet every winter, especially near Christmas, a figure returns to its crumbling corridors. She is known only as the Mourning Widow, and her cry is said to foretell a death in the town. Locals say she appears dressed in black, a long veil covering her face. She never speaks, never shows her hands, but those who've seen her describe the overwhelming grief that radiates from her. She walks slowly between the gravestones, trailing her veil in the frost-covered grass. Some say she weeps, others say she keens, her voice soft but heart-wrenching, echoing across the cold stones of the abbey ruins. The legend traces back to the 1600s, during one of Roscommen's darkest winters. A young noblewoman named Eliza ní Chialet had married into the local gentry, despite her family's warnings. Her husband, Sir Lawrence Blake, was a harsh and superstitious man, and when Eliza bore him no children, he accused her of witchcraft. On Christmas Eve, in front of horrified townsfolk, she was dragged from their home and buried alive in the abbey crypt. A punishment he claimed was in accordance with divine justice. The story would have ended there, if not for what followed. In the weeks after Eliza's death, the Blakes' house was beset by tragedy. Servants heard weeping in the hallways at night. Lawrence Blake fell ill and died within a month, his body twisted in pain, his face locked in terror. And on the very first anniversary of her death, a hooded woman in mourning black was seen gliding silently through the abbey ruins, her head bowed in sorrow. She's been seen many times since, One of the most chilling accounts comes from 1923, when a schoolteacher named Bridget Mooney was walking past the Abbey on her way home. It was a quiet December evening, and the frost had settled heavy on the stones. As she passed, she heard a soft sound, like someone sobbing in the dark. She paused and saw her, a woman in black, kneeling beside a grave, her veil trembling with silent grief. Bridget ran, and the next morning one of her pupils died suddenly of pneumonia. In more recent years, paranormal groups have attempted to document the mourning widow. Thermal imaging and sound equipment have picked up unexplained cold spots and strange whispers in the Abbey ruins, particularly near the old crypt. One recording captured what sounded like distant keening, almost like a woman singing a lament in Irish. No birds, no breeze, just that voice. Despite the fear she inspires, the townspeople of Roscommen view the mourning widow with respect. Flowers often appear on the steps of the Abbey during the Christmas season, left by those who believe she is still searching for peace. Some say she is not a traditional banshee, but rather a restless soul trapped in mourning. Yet her presence, like the banshees, is always a warning. And so each winter, when the nights are longest and the cold clings to the stone, the people of Roscommen listen. If they hear a cry in the dark, they lock their doors and light a candle, not in fear of her wrath, but in remembrance of her sorrow. Because the mourning widow does not come to punish, she comes to grieve, and where she grieves, death follows. Legend number 4, the child banshee of Clare. There's something especially unsettling about the sound of a child crying in the dark. In the burn of County Clare, where limestone stretches like cracked bone across the hills, that sound is more than sorrow. It's a warning. Among the twisted hazel trees and ancient tombs of this haunting landscape, the child banshee is said to roam, weeping before a death that no one expects. This legend isn't tied to noble houses or royal bloodlines. It belongs to the land itself, to the strange, echoing valleys, and the people who've worked the rocky soil for centuries. Some say the spirit is the ghost of a young girl lost to the famine. Others believe she is a fairy child stolen by the Sida, returned in sorrow to mourn a life that never had a chance. The first known reference to her dates back to the 1840s. A priest named Father Malloy kept journals of strange occurrences during the worst years of the Great Hunger. In one entry, he described visiting a farmhouse near Cairn, where a child had died in the night. The family claimed they'd heard crying outside their window the night before, but it wasn't the baby. It was another child, unknown, whose sobs echoed through the rocky fields until dawn. Years later, the story repeated itself. In 1897, a woman named Mare Ní Riain was walking through a limestone pass near Pulnabrony Dolmen. It was nearing dusk when she heard a sound that stopped her cold, soft crying, high-pitched and pitiful, coming from among the stones. At first she thought a child had been lost or abandoned. She searched the path and called out, but no one answered. Just as the sun dipped below the horizon, she saw a small figure standing in the distance, barefoot, white-eyed, arms limp by her side. When Mary blinked, the child was gone. The next morning, Mary's brother died suddenly of a heart attack. In modern times, the legend of the child banshee has only grown. Hikers exploring the burn at twilight have reported hearing distant sobs, or catching glimpses of a small figure in the periphery of their vision. One man, camping with friends near a ring fort, claimed he was woken by a child's voice whispering just outside his tent. When he looked out, there were no footprints in the morning frost, except a single small print near his fire pit. Unlike traditional banshees who wail loudly or appear visibly aged, this child spirit seems lost, grieving, confused, and incredibly sad. Some say she does not even know she is dead. Others claim she is no child at all, but a manifestation of the burn's pain, a fairy disguised in innocence, warning that life hangs by a thread. Folklorists note that child banshee legends are rare, but not unheard of. In Irish mythology, there are tales of changelings, children stolen by fairies and replaced with imitations. Some believe this particular spirit is a changeling who died in both worlds, cursed to wander the border between. Those who hear her crying are said to suffer no harm themselves, but someone close to them will not see another sunrise. To this day, walkers in the burren tread carefully when the wind is still and dusk begins to fall, because if you hear a little girl crying where no child should be, you may not be in danger, but someone you love might be. Legend number 5, the Screaming Shadow of Slane. In County Meath, just outside the village of Slane, stands the famous Hill of Slane, a sacred site steeped in legend, tied to St. Patrick, ancient druids, and kings long dead. But in the shadow of that hill lies a tale far older than Christianity, one that still makes locals shiver after dark: the Screaming Shadow of Slane. This banshee isn't seen weeping or washing bloodied cloth by moonlight. She does not glide or appear in sorrow. Instead, she manifests as a shifting, cloaked shadow, a howling, banshee-like presence that appears suddenly, screams violently into the night, and then vanishes just as quickly. Her cry isn't mournful. It's raw, violent, and deafening. A scream of fury more than grief. Her presence is said to be tied to the ancient O'Connor clan, once powerful rulers of Meath. According to local lore, during a feud in the early 1600s, one of the O'Connor lords executed a druid woman accused of betrayal. She was burned at the base of the Hill of Slane while cursing the family, screaming that she would come for them in their darkest hour. And she did. In 1622, on the eve of an outbreak of plague that killed half the village, residents reported hearing inhuman wails rising from the wooded edge of the hill. Some thought it was an animal. Others, especially the O'Connors, knew better. One of the family's descendants, a squire named Donal O'Connor, reportedly vanished after a night of heavy drinking in the village. His body was found 3 days later, face frozen in a look of pure horror, his fingernails bloodied from clawing at the ground. The only other thing found was a cloak-shaped burn mark scorched into the grass nearby. Since then, the screaming shadow has been heard on stormy nights, especially around Samhain and Christmas. Her presence is marked by sudden cold, the sensation of being watched, and then, without warning, a scream so loud and high-pitched it can burst eardrums. Those who've heard it often become ill, some suffering fevers or hallucinations for days afterward. One chilling modern account came from a group of paranormal investigators in 2007. While conducting an EVP session near the old stone monastic ruins on the hill, they captured audio of a blood-curdling scream. Moments later, their equipment failed. A thermal camera, recording at the time, picked up a black shape moving unnaturally fast across the landscape, humanoid in shape, but with no discernible features. The group abandoned the investigation that night and refused to return. Unlike more traditional Banshee stories, this entity is seen not as a mourner, but as an avenger. Some call her a cursed fairy. Others believe she was a priestess, wronged and buried in secret. But everyone agrees. When she screams, something terrible is about to happen. The Hill of Slane remains a tourist attraction by day, but by night, locals avoid it. Farmers have been known to leave certain gates open or turn their animals away from the wooded slopes. Some leave offerings of milk or bread at the base of the hill during times of family illness, hoping to ward her off. And if you ever find yourself there alone just before midnight and feel a sudden chill, run, because the screaming shadow of Slane is never far behind. Legend number 6, the Pale Lady of Portumna. At the edge of Lough Derg, nestled in the quiet town of Portumna, County Galway, stands a haunting reminder of a bygone era, Portumna Castle. Though beautifully restored today, with gardens and galleries that attract tourists in the summer months, locals know it hides a far darker secret. For when the lake mist rolls in thick and grey, and the castle grounds fall into silence, the pale lady returns. She's said to walk the grand staircase, her gown brushing the old stones, her face hidden beneath a lace veil. But it's her voice, high, trembling, and sorrowful, that strikes fear. The pale lady of Portumna is a banshee, and her cry means only one thing: death is near. The legend dates back to the 18th century. Eleanor Burke, the daughter of a powerful local family, was set to marry a British officer to secure political favour, but Eleanor had fallen in love with a stable boy named Thomas. When her father found out, he had Thomas dismissed and banished from the estate. On the eve of her arranged wedding, Eleanor fled into the woods to find Thomas. She never returned. Some say she drowned herself in the lake. Others whisper she was caught, punished, and sealed in the castle's cellar to avoid scandal. Whatever the truth, her wail was heard the very night she disappeared. That same night, her father suffered a fatal stroke. The next generation of Burkes reported seeing her at the windows, her white gown glowing faintly in the moonlight. A visiting poet in the 1830s documented her in a journal, describing a translucent figure ascending the stairs, uttering a sigh so mournful it struck me ill. The poet died of a fever within a week. Her appearances have continued, sporadic but consistent, especially during the winter months. Locals say she only appears to those with Burke blood in their veins, even those unaware of their connection. One school teacher, who had moved to the area in the 1970s, reported seeing a woman in white standing at the castle gates. Days later, he learned he was distantly related to the Burke family through his grandmother. He died in a car accident that same week. But not every encounter ends in death. Some believe the pale lady is a protector, her cry a warning rather than a curse. There are tales of people who saw her, heard her wail, and managed to warn a loved one, escaping tragedy by mere hours. In 2015, a young woman touring the castle with a group stepped away to take a photo. When she reviewed her pictures later, she found an odd shape at the top of the stairs. A pale figure with what appeared to be a veil over its face. She was so disturbed she didn't sleep for days. A month later, her uncle passed suddenly in a boating accident on the lake. Paranormal investigators who have explored the castle report unexplained temperature drops, EMF spikes on the stairs, and faint recordings of whispering, often in Irish. One recording reportedly captured a woman's voice softly saying, "He should not go." Tour guides now avoid telling the full legend to visitors, especially on stormy days. But ask any local, and they'll tell you, the Pale Lady of Portumna is no fiction. She walks in sorrow, weeps in silence, and sings her mournful cry when death draws near. So if you ever visit Portumna Castle, and the evening grows cold and quiet, pause at the bottom of the stairs. Listen. And if you hear the faint sound of crying, don't look up. Legend number 7. The Singing Banshee of Glendel. Glendel, the valley of the two lakes, sits in the heart of County Wicklow, surrounded by soaring cliffs, ancient monasteries, and forests that seem to hold their breath. It's a place of reflection and pilgrimage, where mist clings to the waters and time moves a little slower. But beneath the serenity, a chilling tale endures, of a banshee whose song drifts across the lakes, beautiful and mournful, always before death. Unlike the ear-splitting scream of most banshee tales, this one sings. That's what makes her so dangerous. Local folklore tells of a spirit woman who appears just before someone passes, her voice rising softly in Irish laments, sung so sweetly that those who hear it can barely tell whether it's a blessing or a curse. She is not often seen. Her song, they say, floats across the lower lake just before sunrise, heard most clearly near the ruined cathedral and round tower. The legend dates back over 1,000 years. One of the earliest written accounts comes from a monk's chronicle in the 12th century. It records a heavenly voice heard before the death of a beloved abbot, describing it as the voice of a woman singing the sadness of the world. After the monk's death, no one could explain where the music had come from. Later stories gave the spirit a name, Aiblian, said to be the ghost of a bard who once lived in the valley, gifted with a voice that moved even the hardest warriors to tears. When her lover died in battle, Aiblian climbed to the cliffs above the lake and threw herself into the water. Her body was never found, but from that day onward, her song returned every time someone was about to die. One of the most chilling modern accounts comes from 1982, when a hiker named Tom Ferrin spent the night camping near the upper lake. Around 4 a.m, he was woken by the sound of soft singing, so clear, so pure, it seemed to echo through the trees and into his bones. He later described it as like a lullaby and a warning rolled into one. That same morning, he received a call telling him his grandmother had passed during the night. Another encounter came from a Dublin woman in the 1990s who was walking the monastic city trail alone when she heard what she thought was an old woman humming in Irish. The air was still, but the sound seemed to come from every direction. She turned to see a shadowy figure at the lake's edge, her long hair waving though there was no wind. The song stopped. When the woman blinked, the figure was gone. Unlike other banshees who appear tied to specific families, the singing banshee of Glendel seems to transcend bloodlines. Her presence is linked to place, not name. Visitors from all over Ireland and abroad have claimed to hear her melody, always at twilight or before dawn, always followed by news of a loss. Some believe she's not a banshee at all, but a guardian spirit of the valley. Others say she is among the oldest of her kind, a fairy mourner whose gift is music instead of wailing. But all agree that her song is more than a sound. It's a feeling, one that settles deep in the chest and never quite leaves. Locals sometimes leave offerings near the lakes, flowers, coins, even old sheet music, as a way to honour her. Tour guides occasionally speak of her to groups, but they lower their voices when doing so, as if afraid she might hear her name spoken aloud. So if you ever find yourself at Glendel during the thin hours between night and day, and you hear singing that seems too perfect for this world, don't follow it. Don't look for its source. Because the singing banshee of Glendel sings only for the dying. Legend number 8. The Crying Midwife of Castlebar. In County Mayo, tucked between rolling hills and weather-beaten stone cottages, the town of Castlebar harbours a story that's passed between generations in hushed tones. While most banshees are said to wail before death, this one is known not for her scream, but for the low, heartbroken sobbing that echoes through the back lanes and narrow roads of the town during the coldest nights of the year. She is known as the Crying Midwife of Castlebar. The legend begins in the 1700s with a woman named Eilis ní Shuilia Boine, a skilled midwife who was called upon by rich and poor alike. Her reputation spread throughout the region for her calm presence and miraculous ability to save both mother and child in the most dire of circumstances. But despite her dedication to others, her own life was marked by tragedy. Her husband drowned in a bog during a winter storm, and their only child died in infancy during childbirth, a delivery Eilis could not save. After that, something in her changed. Eilis became more withdrawn, still serving the people of Castlebar, but with a quiet sorrow that clung to her like a shadow. She continued to deliver babies into the world until the night she vanished. It was the winter of 1763, and Eilis had gone out on foot to help a labouring woman in a farmhouse just outside town. The snow was heavy that night, and she never arrived. Her body was found days later, frozen beside a stream, her hands clutched around a bloodied cloth and a broken lantern. The family she was meant to help lost both mother and child during the birth. In the years following her death, strange reports began to surface, particularly during December and early January. People living along the road to the old farmhouse said they heard soft, pitiful sobbing at night. Some even claimed to see a woman in a tattered shawl walking with a lantern through the snow, only to vanish when approached. Her face, when seen, is described as pale and grief-stricken, her eyes hollow but wet with tears. One of the earliest detailed accounts comes from 1820, written in a journal by a parish priest who claimed he encountered the spirit one stormy Christmas Eve. As he travelled on horseback to visit a dying parishioner, he saw what he thought was a poor woman struggling along the roadside. He dismounted to help her, but when he touched her shoulder, she turned, and there was nothing beneath the shawl but a void of swirling frost and wind. A moment later, she was gone, and the priest's horse bolted. The next morning, the man he had been travelling to see was found dead. Over time, the spirit came to be known as a banshee, though she doesn't scream or wail like the others. Her sorrow is quieter, but no less deadly. Witnesses often describe hearing a baby's faint cry or the sudden feeling of cold fingers brushing against their own. And those who hear the midwife sobbing often receive tragic news soon after. The passing of an elderly parent, a stillborn child, or the unexpected death of a young mother. In 2006, a Castlebar paramedic driving the night shift reported seeing a woman kneeling in the middle of a quiet street at 3 a.m. As he slowed to check on her, she stood, looked toward him, and dissolved into the mist. That same night, a baby was lost during an emergency delivery only blocks away. Locals now avoid walking the stretch of road between the old ruins of the farmhouse and the stream where Ailith died, especially during the 12 days of Christmas. Flowers and candles are sometimes left at the bridge, offerings meant to calm her spirit and prevent her from crying again. But those who've heard her say the sound is unforgettable. Not loud, not shrill. Just soft, broken sobs that speak of loss so deep it echoes through the years. And when the crying midwife of Castlebar weeps, someone is about to follow her into the dark. Legend number 9, the Three Sisters of Slieve Bloom. Rising along the border of counties Offaly and Lowies, the Slieve Bloom Mountains stretch across the land like the spine of a sleeping beast. Their slopes are scattered with stone circles, fairy glens, and ancient burial sites, places older than memory, where time feels thin and something older than man still lingers. It's here, hidden among the mists and moss, that the legend of the Three Sisters of Slieve Bloom has terrified travellers for centuries. Unlike most Banshee stories that speak of one spirit, this tale concerns three. They are not mourners, but watchers, appearing together on nights when a great death is near. Not a passing illness or a quiet end in old age, but a tragedy, the death of a hero, a chieftain, or a child taken too soon. And when the three sisters appear, the mountains themselves seem to listen. The legend claims they were once priestesses, daughters of a druid elder who guarded the sacred places of the mountain. When invaders came during the early medieval period, their father was slain and the sisters were captured. Rather than be taken, they threw themselves from the highest cliff above the Glenbarrow waterfall, swearing an oath to protect the land from that day forward. Some say they became spirits of vengeance. Others claim the fairy folk claimed them, binding their souls to the mountain. What all agree on is this: when death looms large, they come, described as tall, willowy figures dressed in green, white and black. The sisters appear as a trio, one young, one in her prime, and one ancient. They do not speak. They stand in silence near the glens or atop ridges, their hair blowing in the wind, their mouths unmoving while an eerie three-part wail echoes across the hills. The sound is unlike anything natural, sharp, harmonic, rising in waves like a dirge sung across time. Some who've heard it say it feels as though the mountain itself is keening, mourning something it knows cannot be prevented. One of the earliest encounters was documented in 1798 the night before a rebel leader was captured and hanged near Mountrath. Shepherds claimed to see 3 figures standing on a ridge just before dawn, their silhouettes glowing faintly under the full moon. That same morning, the rebel was executed. In 1937, a schoolteacher hiking near Glenbarrow claimed he became lost in the fog and stumbled upon a circle of 3 women standing perfectly still. He tried to greet them, but they made no move. Then they vanished. He later learned his cousin had died in a mining accident that very hour. More recently, in 2018, a group of amateur paranormal investigators camping near the ridge of Capard were woken at 2 a.m. by what they described as a 3-part harmony of pure dread. The sound lasted less than a minute, but every piece of recording equipment malfunctioned, and 2 members of the group reported vivid dreams of women in ancient clothing, staring with expressionless faces. Unlike other banshees, the 3 sisters of Slieve Bloom don't appear to mourn individual families. Their presence seems tied to the land and the fate of Ireland itself. According to one theory, they appear only when death carries great weight, when it threatens the balance of things. It is said they appeared the night before the outbreak of the Great Famine, and again before the death of Michael Collins. To some, they are a warning. To others, they are guardians of fate, witnesses to the turning points in Ireland's story. And still they wait. Still they appear, 3 shadows against the mist, whenever the earth is about to tremble with loss. So if you ever find yourself in the Slieve Bloom Mountains and you hear 3 distinct cries weaving together into one unholy song, stop. Turn around, because whatever is coming cannot be stopped, and the sisters already know. Legend number 10. The Banshee of the Blaset Isles. Beyond the far western edge of County Kerry lie the Blaset Islands, a string of windswept landforms battered by the Atlantic, deserted now but still brimming with echoes of the past. Once home to fishermen, storytellers and poets, the Great Blaset is where the land meets the sea, and some say where the living meet the dead. Among the many tales passed down from the islanders, one remains whispered with awe and dread, the legend of the Banshee of the Blasets. Unlike most banshees tied to specific bloodlines or families, this spirit haunts the entire island. She is called An Bian Wishi, the woman of the water, because her cry comes not from the cliffs or the wind, but from the sea itself. Islanders first recorded her presence in oral tales from the 1800s, when the population still thrived. Her wail was not like a woman's sobbing in the distance, but a strange melodic howl that carried on the waves and rose up from the foam. It was said to begin softly at first, like a low note struck on a harp, and then swell into a full cry, echoing off the cliffs and into the hearts of everyone who heard it. The people learned to fear it, for each time the sea cried out in her voice, a soul would be lost before sunrise. One of the most chilling stories passed through generations concerns the Sullivan family, who lost 3 sons to the sea in one night. The day before the tragedy, several villagers heard the banshee cry 3 times, once at dawn, once at midday, and once just before dusk. That evening, a squall rose without warning, and the Sullivan fishing boat never made it back to shore. The sea gave no explanation, just grief. During the early 20th century, as emigration increased and the island began to empty, the banshee's cries grew more sporadic, but more intense. A visiting scholar staying in the old schoolhouse in 1919 recorded in his journal hearing what he described as a wailing song, so mournful and oceanic it seemed sung by the water itself. He woke the next morning to find that a boat en route from the mainland had capsized in a rogue wave, 3 lives lost. Even after the island was fully abandoned in the 1950s, fishermen sailing near the coast continued to report strange sounds. One trawler captain in the 1980s claimed he was anchored off the Great Blaset during bad weather when he heard the sound of a woman singing in Irish, clear and strong despite the roaring sea. He later learned a local poet from Dingle had died that very night, an islander by birth, returning in memory to his childhood home. Today, the Blaset Isles are uninhabited, but hikers and day visitors still occasionally venture there. Those who stay past sunset sometimes report hearing distant music, thin, eerie, and laced with sorrow. Some rationalise it as the wind or seabirds or the waves moving through the cave-pocked cliffs. But those who know the stories know better. They say the Banshee of the Blasets doesn't cry out of vengeance or to announce a curse. She cries for the lost, for the islanders who died in exile, the fishermen swallowed by the sea, and the voices that once filled the hearths with songs and stories. She is a mourner of a people and a place, her song rising from the Atlantic to remind Ireland of what it has lost, and perhaps of what still lingers on that lonely, windswept edge of the world. The cry still carries. From cliffs and lakes to mountain peaks and riverbanks, Ireland's banshees remain part of the land's living soul. They are more than ghosts. They are the breath between worlds, crying out not just for death, but for memory. For some, the banshee is a warning. For others, a guardian. But all agree, when she cries, we listen. Because no matter how far we've come, how modern our lives may seem, the cry of the banshee still carries. Across water, across generations, across the quiet space between now and what's to come.